Imagine this. You are a Soviet missile operator. It is 1976, deep inside a fortified bunker near the Baltic coast. Your radar screen flickers. A single dot appears, moving at a speed your training manual said was impossible. You launch a missile. Then another. Then 4 more. You watch them climb. And you watch them fall behind. The dot never slows down. It never turns. It simply disappears off the edge of your screen. You have just encountered the State Route 71 Blackbird. And you never stood a chance. Over 4,000 missiles were launched at this aircraft during its operational life. Not a single one made contact. Not one. The Blackbird did not dodge. It did not deploy countermeasures. It did not need electronic warfare suites. Its defense was almost insulting in its simplicity. It just flew faster. At Mach 3.2, over 2,000 miles per hour, no missile on Earth could keep up. But this aircraft was more than speed. The State Route 71 was the product of an era when the United States believed it was losing the Cold War. When Soviet nuclear missiles pointed at every major American city. When the only thing standing between total blindness and strategic awareness was a camera, mounted inside a machine that should not have been possible to build. The story begins with a man named Clarence Kelly Johnson. A self-taught aeronautical genius who ran a secret division of Lockheed called the Skunk Works. Johnson had already built the U-2 spy plane. But in 1960, when the Soviets shot one down and captured its pilot, the CIA came to Johnson with a simple demand. Build us something they cannot touch. Johnson faced a problem no engineer had ever solved. At 3 times the speed of sound, air friction heats an aircraft to over 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Standard aluminum airframes would warp and melt. The only metal that could survive was titanium. And in the early 1960s, there was only one country on Earth mining titanium at industrial scale. The Soviet Union. The irony is staggering. The CIA created a network of shell companies and fake mining operations across the globe to secretly purchase titanium from the very country the Blackbird was designed to spy on. Moscow never knew they were funding their own surveillance. Working with titanium was a nightmare. It shattered drill bits. Cadmium-plated wrenches weakened the welds. Even tap water, with its trace chlorine, corroded the metal within weeks. Kelly Johnson's team had to invent entirely new manufacturing techniques, new tools, new alloys. They used distilled water exclusively. Every bolt, every rivet, every panel was engineered from scratch. And then there was the fuel problem. At Mach 3, conventional jet fuel would explode from the heat. Lockheed developed JP-7, a fuel so chemically stable you could throw a lit match into a bucket of it, and the match would simply go out. To actually ignite the engines, pilots used a chemical called triethylborane, which burst into a violent green flame on contact with air. The heart of the Blackbird was its 2 Pratt & Whitney J58 engines. These were not ordinary jet engines. They were shapeshifters. Below Mach 2, the J58 functioned as a standard turbojet. But as the aircraft accelerated beyond twice the speed of sound, movable cones inside each engine inlet, called spikes, translated forward and backward with surgical precision. These spikes captured the supersonic shockwave and compressed the incoming air before it reached the turbine. Above Mach 2.2, the engine essentially became a ramjet. 80% of thrust was no longer generated by the spinning turbine, but by the shockwave itself being funneled through bypass ducts around the engine core. If the shockwave escaped the inlet, a violent event called an unstart, the aircraft would lurch sideways so hard that the pilot's helmet slammed against the canopy glass. Recovery required instant, precise action. Hesitation meant losing the aircraft. Flying the State Route 71 was not a job. It was a calling. Pilots wore full-pressure suits identical to NASA astronauts. They breathed pure oxygen for an hour before each flight to purge nitrogen from their blood. At 85,000 feet, if the cockpit lost pressure, their blood would literally boil in seconds. The aircraft leaked fuel on the ground. This was not a defect. At room temperature, the titanium panels were deliberately designed with gaps. Only when the airframe expanded at cruising speed did the panels seal tight. Ground crews would watch JP-7 drip from the belly onto the tarmac, knowing that 30 minutes later, that same machine would be traveling faster than a rifle bullet. From 1966 to 1990, the State Route 71 operated over every major conflict zone on the planet. Vietnam, the Middle East, North Korea, the Baltic Sea, Libya, Cuba. Wherever American intelligence needed eyes, the Blackbird was there. It carried cameras capable of scanning 100,000 square miles of terrain per hour. From 15 miles above the ground, its optical systems could distinguish objects as small as 6 inches across. Tire tracks in desert sand. Antenna arrays on submarine decks. Supply trucks on jungle roads. All captured in a single pass at 2,000 miles per hour. Enemy air defense networks would detect the State Route 71 approaching on radar. Commanders would scramble fighters. Missile batteries would lock on. And every single time, they would watch the Blackbird cruise through their airspace and disappear before any weapon could close the distance. Over North Vietnam, SA-2 missiles launched by the dozens. Over Libya, MiG-25 interceptors attempted pursuit. Over the Soviet border, the most advanced surface-to-air systems ever built tracked the Blackbird with growing frustration. None of them succeeded. The aircraft's shape, with its blended fuselage and sharp chins, produced a radar cross-section smaller than any aircraft of its era. Its dark iron ferrite paint absorbed radar energy rather than reflecting it. The State Route 71 was, in many ways, the world's first stealth aircraft. Decades before the F-117 Nighthawk, the Blackbird had already mastered the art of near invisibility. One mission stands apart from all others. In April 1986, after the United States bombed Libya in Operation El Dorado Canyon, the State Route 71 was tasked with a post-strike damage assessment. Within hours of the attack, a Blackbird launched from a base in England, refueled mid-air over the Mediterranean, and photographed every target in Tripoli and Benghazi at Mach 3. The entire reconnaissance pass over hostile territory lasted 11 minutes. Libya never knew the aircraft was there until analysts reviewed radar tapes days later. On March 6, 1990, the State Route 71 Blackbird made its final flight. The Air Force had retired the program, citing high operating costs. But the crew of aircraft number 972 had one last statement to make. Taking off from Palmdale, California, Pilot Lieutenant Colonel Ed Yielding and Reconnaissance Systems Officer Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Beta pushed the Blackbird to its limits one final time. Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. coast to coast. 2,300 miles. They covered it in 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 20 seconds. An average speed of over 2,100 miles per hour. It remains an unbroken record to this day. When the aircraft touched down at Dulles Airport, it taxied directly into the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. The engines were shut down for the last time. The cockpit was sealed. And the fastest air-breathing piloted aircraft in human history became a museum exhibit. No successor was ever built. No replacement was ever announced. In an age of satellites and unmanned drones, the idea of a human pilot pushing through the stratosphere at 3 times the speed of sound became a relic of a bolder era. But the State Route 71 Blackbird left behind something no satellite can replicate. A legacy of pure audacity. An aircraft designed on paper with slide rules, built from the enemy's own metal, powered by engines that harnessed shockwaves, and flown by men who wore spacesuits. It never fired a weapon. It never dropped a bomb. It simply flew higher and faster than anything else in the sky. And in doing so, it changed the course of the Cold War without ever pulling a trigger. The Blackbird did not just outrun missiles. It outran an entire era.